Charles, we haven't spoken for a while. Since then, um, the world has changed and is still changing as we speak. And I'm pretty excited for this conversation, knowing I know how much you know about Iran in your time at the CIA. So I'm gonna start at the top, though. I want to get your reaction on the war itself, the strategy behind it, the successes behind it, the plan for a regime change. Was there ever, even maybe going back all the way to January, the crackdown on the protesters, and everyone's talking about the toppling of the regime. Then everyone forgot about it. Then we're back in war in March, and everyone's talking about regime change again. Everyone moved on again. So, what's your take on the whole Iran war and where we are today, and also the Iran before and the Iran today?
Yeah, great question. So, Mario, I think the last time we were speaking, you said, could I imagine a scenario where the supreme leader would be taken out in a conflict? And I think in January, I said, as it turns out, I could. And I think that would be a legitimate target in military operations. And
I remember.
Yeah. So funny how the world changes. And I can't remember where we were there. It was cartel leaders and it was Maduro. Maybe we were in the interlude between Iran. I don't remember where we were, but about that. No, look, this is 47 years. This is a long time coming. This is a nation state that has been at war with America since its founding. It's killed more Americans, has more American blood on its hands. We've had a succession of leaders who've all said the same thing. We will not allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon. And they have pursued a variety of strategies to do that, all with, mixed success. And I think we finally, made that decision. And this administration said, we're not going to kick the can down the road anymore. We're going to crush the can. And so, Iran has an opportunity now with the successful military operation that's been conducted to rebuild itself and rejoin the world as a responsible, member of the international community, free of pursuing weapons of mass destruction, free of destabilizing efforts in the Middle East through its surrogates. But that's a choice. And there are certainly some in Iran right now who are clinging to power, even at the expense of some other regime stalwarts of Ghalibaf and of others, Araghchi, that have been involved in negotiations, that don't want that because they know it is zero sum for them. For the IRGC, if this government turns into a responsible government, it will be a significant challenge, and they, it's existential for them. And we've seen a lot, but where do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm going to start with the first thing you said: successful military operation, and also you talked about the nuclear program. Mm-hmm. So to give you my position as well, so I'm very critical of the war. I was very critical of the regime in January, but I was very worried that any military operation could lead to, where we are today. And everyone expected the Strait of Hormuz to be closed. Now, I don't know the leadership in Iran as well as you do. Now, remember our discussion when I asked you, is the supreme leader, will he ever be a target if the US decided to launch a war in Iran? You said, yeah, I don't see why not. And he turned out to be the first target when the war started. So my first question is, actually, let's stick to that one. Why do you think he was a target? And also, why do you think Iran is still functioning from a leadership perspective? We thought they'll be divided. There are people talking about a mutiny within Iran as well. But there's multiple reports that came out that they've decentralized the power. There's a report that came out today that the supreme leader himself doesn't have the same power he had before. It's been decentralized to the rest of the leadership. And the regime seems to be stronger than it was before. Their stranglehold on the country, at least it seems like it.
Oh yeah, Mario, I'll challenge you on most of those accounts. So first, yes, leadership appears to be diffuse, but it's diffuse because it's splintered. We took out key centers of gravity, and that's people. Supreme Leader's office, within the military, within the SCNS, within the intelligence ministry. Key people are gone. And I would say to an extent, we don't know who is leading Iran right now. I would suspect that Iranians, for the vast majority, don't know who's leading Iran. The fact that they've continued to crush the communications from inside, who is the spokesperson? Who's speaking on behalf of Iran? Is it Ghalibaf? We thought maybe up until a week ago, Abbas Araghchi. Is it Vahidi from the IRGC? Who's speaking on behalf of Iran? Where's Mojtaba? They haven't buried the previous supreme leader. I think in a lot of ways, they are the most successful thing that they've done with this military campaign is the information campaign. The way that they have controlled information that's getting out of Iran and even some of their positive IO campaigns that they're putting out to try to influence the U.S. media, trying to influence the U.S. enrolled population. But I think from a military perspective, this was absolutely successful. And I think anyone, candidly, that takes a look at it says this was an absolutely successful military operation that significantly degraded their capabilities. Now, hey, credit where credit's due. The Iranians were a significantly more resilient than I thought. You know, their ability to absorb the strikes and to respond back with their ballistic missiles and drones. Whether that will turn to be a strategic or will turn out to be, you know, in retrospect, the thing they should have done, or whether they shouldn't have attacked a lot of non-involved parties. But I mean, it's been a conflict. But I think if you look at the end of it, I think if there was an honest accounting of losses, of damage, of destruction, of setting back a program, of removing key centers of malign influence, it's hard to say anything but a decisive, destructive victory from the U.S. Now the Iranian people have the opportunity to remake their government.
So I think whether it's a success or not depends on what the objective was, and I think people are still disputing what the objective even is. Is it their nuclear program? Because their nuclear program in the Omani negotiations, according to the Omanis, the mediators, and according to European sources as well, Iran was willing to concede significantly on their nuclear program, and everyone thought a deal was near. So if that's their objective, they were going to achieve that before the war. If the objective is to degrade Iran's military capabilities, one could argue that's been achieved, but it's hard to know the exact figures. Initial reports were like 70 to 80% of their missile launchers were destroyed. That number dropped to 50%. Israeli sources were talking about how Israel cannot destroy their underground missiles. They don't have the capacity to destroy their underground missiles. And then, but this is all, you know, leak this, leak that. Someone says this, someone says that. It's the best thing to do. We could trust his actions and what Iran was able to achieve. And I'm going to enjoy this because I'd love to be challenged. I always like to challenge my beliefs. But we've seen Iran be able to retaliate to all their attacks. You know, when their gas field got struck, they retaliated, struck their gas field. When their energy infrastructure, other energy infrastructure was struck, they retaliated in kind. When they struck next to the Bushehr power plant, they attacked the town next to Dimona power plant in Israel. So they were able throughout the entire war to respond tit for tat. And they haven't used all their cards. They haven't used the Houthis in the Bab el-Mandeb Straits. So in my view, I'm like, their actions have shown that they've exceeded expectations. And the final thing is that in the negotiations right now, usually when a party's losing, you'd expect them to capitulate, especially if they're a pragmatic party. But they haven't. If anything, they're playing Trump's game in terms of mocking him, same way he humiliates them. They try to humiliate him and mock him. So they're playing the information warfare. They're not budging. They want to delay the nuclear program now. And they want to control the Strait of Hormuz. It's like they come out with more after the war, putting the damages aside, than before the war. So that's why it's hard to look at that and kind of that kind of addresses 2 points: their capabilities from a military perspective and whether the American objective was achieved.
It's great. It's a great perspective, Mario. And for me, part of that gets into what was the American objective. If there's an area that I think we could have been clearer from the beginning, that would have been useful. I think if the objective was to destroy the remnants of the nuclear program and to significantly degrade their ability to threaten the Gulf, to threaten other places, I think that it was achieved. However, we got a little muddled or a little conflated early on when we said, okay, now Iranian people rise up. Because if our goal is regime change, now one could argue that the regime has changed. Fundamentally, the regime has changed. Now the regime is going to have an opportunity to make a decision about how it proceeds forward. But status quo is done, right? At a minimum, just from the people that were involved. You know, we're no longer
but
dealing
change
with
for better or worse, you think? Because it's the same supreme leader's last name, but it's not the same person. I know people like to make fun of it. Khamenei Senior, Khamenei Junior, different people. But do you think more hardline or less from what you've seen so far?
You know, it's really hard to tell. And I think part of that gets into what do we think is Mojtaba's state? You know, is he incapacitated? Is he significantly diminished? I would say the fact that we haven't seen him, we haven't heard from him, written statements only, that he is, if not statutorily diminished, he is certainly physically diminished. And I mean, it's hard for me to think that we haven't been successful if the goal was to significantly denigrate their military capability and their ability to engage in a negative way. Now, the fact your comment was spot on. I've been surprised by their resilience. I've been surprised I shouldn't be, by their willingness to engage in attacks against a lot of non-combatants or a lot of other states in the Middle East.
Yeah, the UAE has been very shocked by it as well. I was speaking to the advisor of the president yesterday, and they're like, we're surprised they attacked us, but we're surprised at the ferocity of it, especially how they've attacked the UAE more than Israel.
I don't understand why anyone is surprised by it, because this is it. This is existential. This is an attack against their leadership. It's an attack to get rid of their government, to change their government. I mean, if anything that they've ever said over time, this is when they would unleash all of their plans, all of their surrogates. They said this time and time and time again. The red line was, if you try to change the regime, we will unleash everything we have, and they have.
Yeah.
And we talked about it before, right? The denigration of Hezbollah and Hamas, and even the Houthis, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, any of the other organizations that traditionally they used as deterrence, unconventional warfare deterrence, haven't been in play because they've been destroyed since October 7th. Even the Houthis, to an extent, I think is really interesting what they have and haven't done there in the Red Sea. So everything that they could possibly do at this point, and that is causing mass destruction with their ballistic missiles and their Shaheds, and the work that they've done in the Strait to close the Gulf. But again, yes, that's bad. But strictly from a military perspective, that's hurting a lot of other people that aren't us.
That's true.
We're oil independent. If other states want to get in there and reopen up the sea lanes of communication and the freedom of navigation, come on with it, right? These guys are trying to involve everyone else in the conflict that isn't involved, and at this point, no one else has been willing to jump in.
What do you make of the operation as a whole? You know the Persian culture. You speak Persian.
Yeah,
a lot of intel came into this. Can you give us an idea of what it would have taken? So when you were watching this, with your experiences there, like, how did they get Khamenei? There was reports about them having access to all the traffic cameras. You saw that. They were tracking him for years and years, at least on the Israeli side. And there's reports that they've tried to kill Mushtaba more than once. They failed to do so. We know that the IRGC commanders went to Pakistan in that first round of negotiations. So, and in my mind, I'm like, all right, they must be tracking them right now. From intelligence perspective, how deep was the penetration within Iran? And once a war like this happens, how easy or hard is it for Iran to kind of to get rid of all the assets that Israel and the US have in the country?
Yeah, I think the challenge here is, and this is a challenge that most nation states face today, their reliance on their communications infrastructure and their technical infrastructure becomes a liability. We saw Hamas use that against Israel on October 7th. They used the Israeli security cameras as ways to case and to support their operation. And it looks like that's exactly. Oh, yeah.
Hamas used, sorry. You said Hamas used the Israeli security cameras?
100%. Yeah. Cameras that were set to open or that had poor security or things like that. In every conflict now, open CCTV cameras have been a technique. We saw that in the UAE, and we saw that in other places that Iran was using those security cameras for targeting. We saw it. Russia did it against Ukraine, using open CCTV cameras for targeting and battle damage assessment. This is just a new front in the war. And I spend a lot of time talking about surveillance capitalism, or we call it ubiquitous technical surveillance, and all the ways that we live our lives technically and all the data that emits. What a significant figurative and literal attack surface it presents. And so from Iran's perspective, this is where I think that, the leadership is fragmented. How do they communicate? How do they get together for a meeting? What? Good gravy. Don't put me on the group chat to try to get us together in a place to have a meeting. No, thank you.
That's what they did to Hezbollah. Apparently, Hezbollah was all on a Zoom meeting. You saw that massive attack 2 weeks ago. Apparently, all of Hezbollah were having a Zoom meeting the day or 2 days after the ceasefire, or day after the ceasefire in Israel just went. That's why there was that massive attack in Lebanon.
Yeah, and every single country is vulnerable to that right now because these systems are developed to communicate, but geolocation is also a function of them. And so Israel's ability to use Tehran's surveillance cameras and video traffic cameras and things like that against them, not surprised. People can't live without cell phones. Cell phones emit. No one's willing to live with the discipline they need to, particularly in their home country, particularly when they're living 24/7, to live without cell phones. People know they shouldn't, but they still do. And the way that the whole and the entirety of society is built around our modern telecommunications infrastructure makes it really hard to get away from that. Yossi, I strongly recommend, Mario, if you haven't read it, Yossi Cohen, the former director of Mossad, wrote a book, and it talked about the first 12-day war. And, oh, man, there's a paragraph that I pulled out that is amazing where he talks about, I am in your devices, and your devices tell me where you are and where you live, and you take me with you everywhere you go. And it is just a magnificent
That's crazy
articulation of today's world. But this isn't Israel, Iran. This is Russia, Ukraine. This is China, U.S., Taiwan. I mean, this is everybody. Everybody's living in the same threat environment.
Man, I asked, I've asked more than one. There was one recent one asking an official in the U.S. government. I said, like, do you worry, and a pretty high up official, I'm like, do you worry about Mossad listening to your phone? As a joke, we're having dinners off the record. But I'm not mentioning anything new because everyone says the same thing. I'm like, do you worry about it? Like, Mario, I've accepted it. And they've given me an example of how Mossad was listening to their calls. Well, holy shit. And that's, again, a senior official in the US government. So it's like everyone's accepted it as a fact that there's nothing you could do to stop the CIA and Mossad from tracking you. Me and you spoke about it before. And that's that's just someone outside of Iran. That's for an American or Westerner that probably has proper security. And you go to Iran, where Mossad has been investing everything they have to hack into everything that is hackable. I don't know, how is Mujtaba communicating with his leadership now?
That's the question. And that's why I think that the communication blackout is so important and why we're seeing fragmented leadership. I can't imagine. Do you think before the next round of negotiations that Aragchi and Galibaf and Vahidi are going to get in this? Yeah, are going to get in the same place and talk? I don't think so. How are they communicating? Jesus. What does that even look like? And Mario, I'll tell you, back 20 years ago, I was working against a country that had a very centralized command structure and that was in a conflict zone or conflict time like this. And talking to people on the edge, they said, we don't know what to do. We're not getting any guidance from capital, and no one wants to take any action without the guidance. We are fragmented. It looks like we are being, deceitful, or it looks like we're being tricky. But spoiler alert, we just don't know what we're doing because we can't communicate. Every time we raise our head to communicate, something blows up. And this is even worse. This is 100 times worse than that. So, from an effective command and control, I think it is absolutely fragmented. I think the C2 environment in Iran must be miserable right now. And again, you wouldn't want to get together. And this is where we're starting to see, I think, I'm reading reports about, decentralized command and individual IRGC commanders getting quite a bit of latitude. They're getting commander's intent, but then they take it out the way they want to take it out, or they carry out the commander's intent however they see fit, and whether that's a strait or whether it's other places. But no, I think it is a fascinatingly complex environment, and I think from an information perspective, it's really hard, and it's hard to sort through what's happening in the Middle East as far as press. It's hard to sort through what's happening in the U.S. with press. If you sat and listened to the U.S. press, you would think we're getting defeated so bad we should just quit. It's a quagmire. It's horrible. We've lost. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. By any objective measure of fact, this has been a wildly successful military campaign. Now, we can argue about the political objectives and what is the knock-on effect. But from a military perspective, not even close. Not even close.
Yeah, I think it's not even comparable. If you're going to compare apples to apples, nothing compares to the US military, especially not a country like Iran. I think where it gets tricky when you start looking at the strategic benefits is like the Strait of Hormuz was open, now it's closed. The Gulf, will they be closer to the US, weaker? The American stockpile munitions, they've been depleted 50%. The US is less prepared for Taiwan. So that's where it gets debatable. But yeah, for comparing apples to apples, I think it's not even a comparison. The US military might is petrifying for anyone that stands up to the US, like Maduro, but also the intelligence might of the CIA and Mossad put together is even scarier. I want to ask you that question again. What are the options? We don't know how much Mujtaba's communicating. What are the options that he can communicate? Someone told me it was Malcolm Nance, who's former Navy, I think, an intel officer, and he told me, Mario, I think it was him. He's like, he would have runners, as in he would literally write something on a piece of paper, and that person would run to someone, run somewhere else, etc. Literally, men running around with a letter from the supreme leader to give it to the commanders, which is also concerned, which is also could be traced from an intelligence perspective, because they can just track the runners if they find out who's receiving the message and going to trace it back. Just scary to imagine.
Yeah, well, and you look at, how was Saddam communicating when he was on the run? How was Bin Laden communicating?
How was he?
Do
you know?
Runners and communicate.
Really?
Couriers. Absolutely. You look at Bin Laden when he was holed up in Abbottabad, he had a courier. Well, eventually we tracked the courier back to Abbottabad. It's public knowledge.
Yeah. Is that the one? Yeah, exactly. That's the. Hold on. When you say public knowledge, means you were part of it. So hold on. Is that the? I remember in the movie about the killing of Osama bin Laden. I'm sure you know which movie it is. And they were following a car that was on a phone. He would go make a call, drive around in a circle, make a call. Is that when a courier? Would they use a phone or literally a written piece of paper? How does a courier work?
Again, it all depends. Iran being a nation state is a little bit different from someone who's living off the land where we're actually, occupying there. However, I suspect it would be the same way. Mojtaba is probably either moving or he's hiding or he went to ground. He probably communicates via written writing or via, some kind of correspondence. Even, it's 21st century, right? Even drafting a note, putting it on a thumb drive and sending it, because they own the turf. It's not like, they would be concerned about the courier being intercepted. But I would imagine anyone who's associated with him, anyone in his protective service detail, any of his key advisors are probably not using phones around wherever he's living. Because if they were, they could be tracked. And if they're tracked, there's you don't even have to intercept the communications to be able to take the metadata off them and the locational information off of them to take action against it. And so again, this is why I think that the challenge, even if we wanted to negotiate and meaningfully, even if let me back that up, even if Iran wanted to meaningfully negotiate, which I don't believe they do, it would be a challenge for them to be able to coordinate the message and get everybody on the same page, because they won't get everyone in the same room. I wouldn't if I were them.
They did go. What do you make of the fact that the leadership, there was like 2 delegations that went to Pakistan. First one, the Ghalibaf, the Rachi's, the president, I don't know if he went, but Rachi and Ghalibaf went there, which were not targets that were given protection by the US, allegedly, and that's the US, not Israel. But then afterwards, there was a second delegation, a pretty large delegation. These were the IRGC commanders. That sounds like a pretty risky thing to do. Wouldn't it be easier to track them back all the way to Iran and continue tracking them today? And then one could argue, couldn't the negotiations all been a trap just to be able to find out where they are and be able to trace them back home and maybe even trace back Mojtaba? And that was part of the plan all along. Is that a possibility?
I don't think so. I mean, I wouldn't discount it. Obviously, people that are involved are being tracked. If for no other reason than you want to know what they're going to say in those negotiations before they show up. That's just the nature of tactical intelligence and supporting strategic negotiations. You want to know what their talking points are before they get there. Now, from the geolocation and military operation perspective, of course, if you can track them back to where they're going, that would be helpful and useful. Now, I suspect they're taking great measures to the equivalent of, electronically launder their activity when they go back, to separate any selectors or any phones or any communication devices that they took there, so that they're not taking them back. But I don't know what kind of operational security measures they're taking. I just would imagine if they're not taking good ones, they won't have the option of not taking good operational security measures for long.
What do you call that box? Is it a Faraday box? The one where you put your phone in there and is it called Faraday or something like that? Is that what it's called?
The material. Yeah, it's a Faraday bag, Faraday box, Faraday material.
Do they work? I've got a whole bunch of them, but do they actually work?
Well, that's the galactic. It depends there, Mario. If you've got the right technology, if you use it correctly, if it still has integrity, Faraday cases work to block all the electronic signals coming out of your electronic device. It's great. If you don't close it appropriately, it will leak. If it's not constructed appropriately, it will leak. If the fibers inside of it get degraded over time, it will leak. I always joke, I say that I got my first Faraday bag in the mid-2010s, and before I really knew how it worked, I carried it around for like 5 years. Well, then when I realized and learned how they actually worked, I was basically carrying the equivalent of a men's clutch to put my phone in, because it really wasn't blocking any signals.
Yeah, there's a lot of, there's certain meetings you go in there and you have to put your phone in a Faraday box, and then they take a Faraday box to an outside room as well. I've always thought, like, does it, if I'm an Iranian leader right now, is there anything I can do to avoid detection by the CIA and Mossad if they want to get me? Like, how difficult is it to avoid with using technological products? I'm saying not going in a cave and sending out letters through a courier. Putting that aside, if I want to, still operate, still be able to have a command and control structure, talk to my commanders, is there anything a leader in Iran or any other country, but let's talk about Iran now, could do? Or in today's technology, it's almost impossible.
Look, I would think you would need to spend a lot of time managing your electronic signature. But, there's probably things you could do. I'm not going to say it out loud. What I would recommend is take that phone, pick it up, and give us a call. Let's talk about how to end this conflict. And if the best way to prevent being targeted, get on board with the right side. Reach out. Let's have a talk. Right? Not me, of course, because I'm not active anymore. But the right people.
What about the assets that Mossad and CIA have? They've been very active. Obviously, Iran had a big purge after the 12-day war, and even now after this war. We've seen a lot of reports of Mossad and or CIA, but mainly Mossad operating within Iran, sending drones at besieged checkpoints. I'm not sure if you've seen those footage and stuff to try to cause instability and maybe even trigger regime change protests in the country. So in times of war, would these assets remain in the country? Would they remain in hiding? Would they try to leave the country? What's the protocol for intelligence services during peacetime versus during war when they've been obviously very active?
Yeah. Well, not necessarily commenting specifically about Iran, but just in general, human operations during a very fluid time frame, it just is different. If you have a strategic person who's reporting on strategic issues, you may not be communicating on a regular basis. Well, during wartime, when you need to communicate on a more regular basis, if it's tactical information, protocols change. But I will say it becomes a very interesting situation. I was just telling someone the other day, there's a book about an asset, Fritz Kolbe. Fritz Kolbe was the executive assistant to Ribbentrop, the Nazi foreign minister in World War II. Well, he was also a CIA source or an OSS source reporting to Allen Dulles when Allen Dulles was in Bern. And so you have the seniorest person, the executive assistant to one of the most senior people that's closest to Hitler. And he was being tasked for things like battle damage assessment in Berlin, locational information on leadership that we may want to target, but things that are wildly outside of his natural access. And I always use that as an example of, during wartime, oftentimes you repurpose assets for things that they weren't necessarily designed for or originally contacted for. And again, not speaking anything about Iran, but it becomes obviously a very complicated and what's already a complicated, difficult environment, becomes that much more complicated and difficult.
And I talk about CIA.
Not to say anything. Was that a good answer? There's a whole lot of words.
Yeah, no, it was no. I definitely no. I got it, and I'm trying to understand how a lot of the assets that would have been tasked with one thing before the war would be tasked with something different during the war. Is there any? So there's no protocol where when shit hits the fan, when there's a full blown war, and there's a purge, because you'd expect the country to conduct a purge afterwards to get rid of try to spot all these assets. What's the protocol there? You have to leave the country, maybe return, or you have to remain there, sit in place until the dust settles. What's the usual protocol? Not sure if that's something you can share.
No, not really. And frankly, to the extent there's no usual protocol, it all depends, right? It depends on what happens during the war. What is your position? What did you contribute during the time? Is it appropriate for you to leave? Or is it appropriate for you to stay? Maybe you're going to become the president. I don't know. Maybe we don't want you to leave.
maybe you're gully buff. Who knows?
Right. Maybe we want you to stay. Maybe maybe a promotion's in line.
Exactly.
But it's really hard to say, as far as what a protocol is. It's so case dependent and situation dependent.
And the last thing I want to ask you is about Mossad and CIA. That's always something that's fascinated me. I think we spoke about it briefly last time. Now, I had a guest earlier today. He told me about something he hasn't shared before. He's a journalist. He said, Mario, the reason they killed the leader, Ismail Haniyeh, in Iran, the reason Mossad or the IDF struck him was because there were secret negotiations between William Burr of under Biden the head of the CIA, and the leaders of, I think his delegation, him personally, with the leaders of Hamas in Canada. They were happening without Israel knowing about it. And when Israel found out about it, that's when they killed Ismail Haniyeh, because they did not want the negotiations to go on. They didn't want a deal that they were involved in that involved Hamas. So, and that, in the Iran war, we saw something similar, where at the beginning of the war, Trump said he had, successors to Khamenei, but they were all killed. That's what Trump's own words. And now there were reports afterwards that was Israel that struck them, because they don't want an early end to the war. They want a regime change or significantly weaken Iran. And another third example is later in the war, when Trump's administration started speaking to Ghalibaf. Trump didn't say his name, and then when they asked him why, he's like, "I don't want him to get killed." Now, did he mean the IRGC will kill him or Israel will kill him? More likely Israel, because the IRGC, he was part of the IRGC. So then my question to you is, how often are disagreements between the CIA and Mossad, and what is their relationship like? Not sure if that's something you know a lot about.
Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily get into very, specifics. I'll just tell you my perspective, and that is, when we were working with, one can imagine when one was working with the Israelis, as long as you keep in mind, when your interests align, no better friend. It's tremendous capabilities.
That I agree.
But if interests diverge, as they do, that's just life in, between nation states. Well, they have their own policies and their own agenda. The things that you mentioned, I don't know anything about. Sounds a little too conspiratorial for me, because I think the closeness of the operations, you can't mount a sustained, complicated military and intelligence operation without having very close contacts and without there being a significant amount of trust, both on the military and the intelligence, also on the political side. The Haniyeh thing, I think the Israelis said flat out after October 7, anyone that was involved is a target. And the fact that they were able to go into an IRGC safe house in Tehran and take him out, was a multi-pronged message. Not least of which, as we talked about last time, it was a very practical way to take out Iran's deterrence, to take out their capability, to cut the legs out from underneath the surrogates that they use for deterrence and attack. So that one, the other bits, look, I think Israel and the U.S. are absolutely aligned on the goals for Iran, which is a stable, peaceful, non-nuclear contributor to the international society. I always look. Don't forget, this was not too much before my time. The good old days, I used to say, when the Jews and the Arabs, the Jews and the Persians and the Americans would beat up on the commie-loving Arabs. We have traditionally had great relationships. Traditionally. The Jews and the Persians in Israel are strong, are a great part of that culture. I mean, this isn't a country that is irredeemable. This isn't a people that's irredeemable. In a lot of ways, the Persians are more aligned with us. Good gravy. If you see the pictures from Tehran and from North Tehran before the revolution, it looked like Los Angeles or Paris, right? So historically, this is a country that belongs in the international community. And so, to the extent that we may have some tactical disagreements about what it looks like and what success looks like, and don't forget, there's always political overlays with all of this. But from a military and intelligence perspective, I don't see a lot of daylight. And I don't think, as far as taking out leadership and taking out, regime targets, I don't know how closely we're coordinating that, but certainly Khamenei at the beginning of the war and a lot of the military targets since, I have to imagine there was a significant amount of deconfliction. And if there wasn't, look, if somebody's off the reservation, then that would have been a problem. But I didn't see or feel that.
Interesting. Yeah, there was also one incident where remember when Israel struck all the oil storage facilities in Iran, and then Trump was like, well, I was even surprised. I didn't expect him to strike to that extent. Now, I'm not sure whether Trump gave him the approval, but he wanted to not take the responsibility for it. That's also possible, because a lot of people argue that Israel does the dirty work for the US and face the consequences for it. It's like two arguments. One of them is that Israel has agency, they act with certain level of impunity, and former CIA officers I've spoken to have made that argument as well, that even from an intel perspective, a lot of times Mossad, they're very aggressive, very capable, and when interests don't align, they'll do anything to achieve their objectives. And on the other side, especially when I speak to Israelis, they're like, we do a lot of the dirty work for the US. We do the work that the US doesn't want to do, it doesn't want to claim they do. Not sure if you've seen that rhetoric come out, and I'm not sure you've experienced which one you've experienced more, where Mossad oversteps or Mossad does the dirty work for the US with the US's permission or request.
I think those are two different perspectives on the same position. I have certainly seen both, and you've seen it. You've seen it in the international realm where, something will happen and, one country will publicly say, oh my God, you can't do that. You can't do that. And privately will say, please keep doing that.
Yeah.
Recognize that I have to publicly say this, but please keep doing that. And so does Israel overstep? Do they do the dirty work for us? One could argue those are the same things. Oh gosh, we really wish you hadn't done that. Now, I feel like there's a little more of a continuity of Israeli policy than there is in the U.S., and that may just be a familiarity bias, because I have seen us swing our policy wildly based on the administrations that are in. The approaches that we've taken to the Iranian, how do we get them to denuclearize? Do we hit them with bombs and sanctions, or do we hit them with piles of cash? And I think that there's been a variety of different approaches that have been taken, and now we're taking a different approach to try to get to the same end state for the most part.
Charles, been a long time since we've spoken. Really enjoyed this conversation, man. We'll probably speak again as this continues, covert and overt operations in Iran, because if you look at all the indicators, it doesn't look like a deal is near, but we'll find out. Fingers crossed.
No, and let's do that just for fun. If you've got a minute, Mario, let's say we talk again in 60 days. Where are we?
You're asking me, man. Fuck. I'm the optimist. Like I get a lot of criticism from the audience because I'm saying that, like, I think both sides don't want to return to war. I was very critical of the war starting out. I thought the war was not necessary, but now I'm worried that Iran is more emboldened, and they're twisting Trump's arm. I feel Trump does not want to continue the war. It's too damaging politically, economically, and also from a military perspective, the munitions are too depleted. So I think Trump is trying to off-ramp, but Iran is, their demands are pretty strict. They're like, look, we're going to control the Strait of Hormuz, which didn't exist beforehand, which was unthinkable a few months ago. The reparations, I think, is just rhetoric. I don't think they'll request reparations. And they're like, we'll talk about the nuclear program later on. So they're not even willing to give a small win to Trump. At least, that's what they're saying out in public. Hopefully, behind the scenes, different discussions are happening, because Trump is like, I'm not going to accept a deal unless I get some concessions on the nuclear program. And if they don't give him that, I worry that he has no choice but to continue the war. And Iran has made some pretty extreme threats. Like I said, if the war continues, we're going to strike. We're going to destroy the undersea cables in the region. We're going to strike more energy infrastructure in the Gulf, and we're going to close the Bab el-Mandeb Straits. From an economic perspective, every economist I spoke to said, Mario, that would be catastrophic. Some people even speaking about a depression. My guess, though, would be Trump will keep the economic blockade, and the Iranians are going to be pretty pragmatic. And I think they'll both meet in the middle somewhere, even though it doesn't look likely right now. There's a massive military buildup. I'm always the optimist, so take that with a grain of salt. But I really think cooler heads will prevail. Iran doesn't want to keep getting bombed and get their commanders killed and their country destroyed. And Trump just wants to move on. Like he's tried this. I don't think he liked it. And now he's focusing on Cuba or something else.
I think it's fascinating. The Iranians are negotiating with someone who probably negotiates more like they do than anyone they've ever dealt with. Iranians, through their system of culture, through their system of language, ta'aruf, and just the emotion and the level that they go to. If you're my friend, oh my gosh, step on my eyeballs, I'll be your slave. All of it in Persian sounds beautiful. But just the way that they're used to engaging, and they're used to saying death to America. They're used to saying this all the time for a whole bunch of people that don't respond in kind. And they've a little bit rhetorically met their match, because anyone that comes out and says, I'll literally end your civilization. And I think it does pain Trump, because he's a man, ironically, he's a man of peace. Of all the people that were going to do this, he was stuck between two pieces. I am not going to allow them to have a nuclear weapon, and I'm a man of peace. And those two things have come into conflict now. And I think the fact that when he comes and he says what he says, I think he says it because he wants to move them. The Iranians, my goodness gracious, have an outstanding opportunity to get out of this with a deal. And the deal is you guys get to live. You guys get to live because you've been threatening the West. You've been killing us for time. Iran just continues to remind me of Al-Qaeda in 1990. How many times can you tell us that we'll kill you and do kill you before we wake up to it and go, hey, these guys might be serious. And so that's where we are with Iran without the 9/11 event to start it. And so when this guy says the things that he says, he wants to get them to the table. He wants a deal. But Iran, I've just seen it over and over and over again, will not miss an opportunity to spite themselves. Take the opportunity. This is the time. Otherwise, we are going to continue to destroy, and we'll get to the right people that will take the opportunity. And if we're not there yet, we'll take off another layer of skin, and then we'll find the right people. And if we're not there yet, we'll take off another layer, and we'll get to the right people. My recommendation to the Iranians, a lot of good friends that are Iranians. I love the Persians. I love the culture. Take the deal. Don't be schmucks. Take the chicken. Now's the time, right? You can't threaten the rest of the world. The rest of the world is not going to side with you. And moreover, the rest of the world is not going to bully this guy, our guy. It's not going to happen. We've got the oil we need. We've got the resources we need. We have the economy we need. He's hurting Europe and he's hurting Asia. And but they're not going to back us down. So here's the opportunity, and again, I'm not golly Ned, Mario. I don't know why I'm using this as an opportunity to speak to my Iranian friends. Do the right thing, right? Sort this out. Open the strait. Stop attacking your neighbors, because you haven't felt pain yet. You may think you felt pain. You haven't felt pain yet. And if you make us go there, by goodness, I'm pretty sure this guy will go there, and he'll do it, and it'll hurt. It's almost like when you. I'm not going to say it like that. It's almost like when you say, gosh, please don't make me do this. This is going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you. I know it may not feel like that in a moment, but it's going to hurt me more than it hurts you. And I think that's what this guy feels like in his heart. He's a man of peace, which is ironic. So anyway, I'll just conclude with that. Where are we at in 60 days? I think the Iranians have a great opportunity. I think we've never seen them miss an opportunity to screw themselves, and I think they're going to do it again. And I think they're going to sideline the moderates, and I think Vahidi and his group are going to try to put down an iron fist. And I hope to God that the Iranian people come onto the street and take out those guys and bring back the moderates. You've got an opportunity. Take it. Please, for the love of God, take it. And the whole, we're running out of weapons.
In Oman, but the munitions I'll let you my comment. But in Oman, they were giving up the nuclear program. They were, according to the Omanis and the Europeans, they were conceding on the nuclear program.
According to the Omanis and the Europeans, they gave up the nuclear program 10 years ago. They never wanted a nuclear program to begin with. The Omanis and the Europeans, love them both, great folks, but they've never met a deal with Iran that they haven't vigorously backed, saying, no, this time is going to be different. The Iranians aren't going to lie to us this time. They're not going to develop a covert nuclear program this time. They're not going to continue to support terrorism. They're not going to continue to develop ballistic missiles and regional attacking capabilities. No, I don't. If they wanted to give up the nuclear program, they would. They don't, and they've now faced someone who's
the reports before the war, because they've always tried to avoid war with the US. I know you might not disagree with this, but if you look at their actions, I know they've caused a lot of havoc in Iraq, and they've always done it through a proxy strategy. But if you look at the proxy strategy, you can say Russia's caused a lot of havoc in the region. China supported groups that killed American soldiers. So it's like the world that we operate in, the big powers use proxies to harm each other and weaken each other. Yeah. But if you look at Iran after the 12-day war, when the US attacked the Iranian mainland for the first time ever, Iran said, we're going to strike your base. This is when we're going to strike. This is how many missiles. They telegraphed everything to make it very symbolic, because they knew they don't mind a war with Israel. At least that's what I think. But they are worried about a war with the US. So I think they were, according to the reports in the Omani days, they were even conceding on the enriched uranium they had. They were happy to send it off to Russia, which is their biggest. The enriched uranium they have right now is probably their biggest leverage, the biggest negotiating card that they have up their sleeve. And they're willing to give that up. Now, the reason that Trump went into war, and obviously I don't know for a fact, I wasn't part of these negotiations, but that's on based on what's coming out afterwards. Now, in terms of Trump getting into this war, the reports are he expected it to be a quick war that would lead to a regime change, which would be ideal. From a strategic perspective, that would be very, very beneficial for the US. Now, you have some people saying it's all at the behest of Israel. I think Israel had a lot of influence, but I don't think they're the ones that said, Trump, we need you to do this. Trump was like, all right, Netanyahu, I'll do it. I don't think it was like that. I think it's more the other way around. Trump has a lot more influence over Netanyahu. But I do think that the Strait of Hormuz gives a lot of leverage to the US over China. And I've said this many times over the last few months. So from a strategic perspective, getting rid of the Iranian regime, who's a government I don't like whatsoever. I'm against the war, but I'm against the Iranian government. Getting rid of the current government gives the US more influence over the Strait of Hormuz, which will be very, very beneficial and strategically important in the rivalry with China. And I want the US to win. I'm a believer in democracies. Now, the war, they got bogged down, and you were going to bring up the munitions. The munitions are, the precision strike missiles are 50% lower. I spoke to the person that came up with a report with the Pentagon, the person that leads the agency or the think tank that did that report we saw on CNN. The precision missile stockpiles are down 50%. The air defense stockpiles are down 50%. The same day a report came out that the US is not ready for any conflict with China when it comes to Taiwan. Then I spoke to Admiral Montgomery yesterday, who said, Mario, he was wargaming. He was in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, wargaming an attack from China. And he said the same thing, that the US would struggle in deterring a Chinese attack because of the depletion of the munitions that will take up to 4 years, I think, to replenish. So you put all these things together. I just think that I don't like Hezbollah. The biggest thing I don't like about the Iranian government is how they treat their people, ideology above their people, but more importantly, the way they support proxy groups. That strategy I'm not a fan of. But I genuinely think, and I think Trump would be I don't speak to him, but it'd be in the same place. A diplomatic solution could have worked, or if it was a military strike, a much more limited military attack, because they're already scared of the US. And my worry, you'll disagree with me for this one for sure. My worry is that after 7 weeks of attacks, or 6 weeks or whatever it is, when the Iranian ability to strike the Gulf, I remember Trump is like, they're not going to strike the Gulf anymore because Iran took like 1 day off. They're not going to strike the Gulf anymore. The Gulf need to thank me for it. The next day, they pummeled the Gulf, and they kept doing it every day afterwards. The Strait of Hormuz will not be closed. We'll open it. The US never opened it. Europe will come open it, and NATO didn't open it. Now, like, all right, Iran, we need you to open it. We're going to destroy civilization, and the Strait of Hormuz is still controlled. My worry is after this war, Iran is like, wow, okay, we can actually withstand American attacks, deplete their munitions. We're so underground that they can't destroy everything we have. The latest report as well came out of the US that a lot of them, they have a lot more than they expected. So my worry right now is the card of US deterrence is weaker than it was. A deal is still possible, and I think Trump could make a good deal, lift the sanctions. The government in Iran changes their strategy, stop supporting proxy. He could turn this into a win. But my worry is that the card of American military, not abilities, the ability for the US to destroy the Iranian military was played, and it did not fail, but also did not achieve what the administration wanted it to achieve, or the objectives it wanted it to achieve. That is my concern.
Interesting. So I would say, objectively, aside from the small boats they're using to enforce, what they're doing in the Strait, the Iranian Navy's on the ocean floor. In general, the Iranian Air Force doesn't exist. Talking about as a successful strategy, us depleting our weapon stock almost sounds to me like, haha, I'm going to let you punch me in the face until you get tired. Haha. And a little bit for me, I always hear that. I don't know.
Muhammad Ali, no? Muhammad Ali worked with Ali.
Exactly. Yeah, but Muhammad Ali had enough to stand up and then knock somebody out, right? That's almost like, Muhammad Ali never fought Mike Tyson and said, well, I'll let you hit me until you get tired. And so, look, the weapon stocks will be replenished. We have a tremendous industrial base. We will replenish those stocks, but when we replenish them, we won't replenish them with older weapons. We'll replenish them with new weapons. The ability of the fight and how we're fighting is changing so quickly Who says we'll even replenish them with the same weapons that we depleted? The ability for us to drive up these, other types of munitions. And so, and frankly, I think there's a lot of countries right now that are shocked, again, repetitively, by our capability, our willingness and our capability to do this across the world with not a Gulf War 1 or 2 style buildup, but to be able to project and execute the amount of power that we're able to produce that quick. 3 carrier battle groups in the Gulf. We park more 5th and 6th generation fighters off a country's coast than they've ever owned. And we
that's
do it
a good point.
3 ships.
The Maduro and this operation, just real quickly, that's an important point you made. Sorry, and let you continue. There is for the people that disagree with you, that they think this is a failure. There's another side to it, and I've mentioned that as well. Is that okay? Maybe it didn't achieve certain objectives, but it did destroy one of the world's, what was considered one of the region's most powerful militaries, and the American ability to do that so quickly and willingness to do it with Maduro and now with Iran is probably going to have some countries think twice. Some people are arguing China will probably think twice before making a move on Taiwan, seeing what happened in Iran. That's an argument some people are making, which I think you're making.
And listen, that's kind of where I was going, from the perspective of, in addition to the munitions we're expending, we're learning, just like everyone else is learning. We are learning how this is working, and we're learning new methods, new weaknesses, new strengths. And so the message just sends to China, I would say, if you think that you can project power in a place that's not in our backyard and we can't do anything about it because we're far away, Iran, other than Israel, Iran is the strongest military in the Middle East was the strongest military in the Middle East by far, right? Other than Israel. We could make an argument about some others, other powers, but, and they haven't even been engaged by the other powers there. So I don't know. I just go back to, at this point, we are resetting the international order, whether it's Maduro in Venezuela, whether it's Iran and their ability to export their revolution, or, if they wanted to give up their nuclear program for peace, they could have done it. They could have done it for 15 years. They could have done it, and they haven't. They've lied. They've hid. They've hid. They've continued to try to develop. Every time that we, they say they are, we catch them cheating. I mean, that's at a certain point, what's the definition of insanity? Keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. And so this administration is taking a different path. And 10 years from now, we may look back and go, man, what a foolish move. Or, when Venezuela and Cuba and Iran are all, flying American flags and we're all great friends and the international order is set, we'll look back and say, goodness, only this guy could have done that. Now, people will never say that because they wouldn't give him any credit. But so anyway, so here we are, Mario. 60 days from now, here's my prognostication. Right? We're going to be where we are. I think we're going to be where we are. We're going to have the Strait of Hormuz opened up. I think we're probably going to have to remove a few more layers of skin. And when they're ready to negotiate, we'll negotiate, because we want to bring this to an end, because we want them to be a responsible member, peaceful member of the international community without a nuclear program. If they're up for it, we were absolutely up for it. If they're not, this guy, I don't know, man. I don't know. This guy is different. He's different. He's a second-term president also, by the way. Now, he doesn't, obviously, he's got a legacy to think about, but what legacy? He doesn't have to worry about another term. He's got to worry about the midterms, but in a lot of ways, this is playing at his strength. He is a guy. I wouldn't want to play cards with him. I wouldn't want to negotiate with him. He'll say something out of the left field, and you'll say, oh, my God, he'll end my civilization. Is he being honest? But I don't know. And that's what a hell of
I agree that on the unpredictability of him. It's one of the parts I got a lot of slack when he made those comments, because I didn't criticize him. I'm like, this is him seeking an off ramp. Yeah. For me, what matters more is action than words. And if this is his negotiating strategy, one can argue that leaders should not speak like this, because then you can't criticize Smotrich or Ben Gvir for saying we're going to wipe out a civilization if whatever they say, or nuke Gaza. You can't criticize them when Trump is saying the same thing. So that's a fair argument. But for me, like, this rhetoric is Trump being Trump. What matters more is what he does on the ground. And on the ground, he hasn't struck the civilian infrastructure and stuff. So for me, that mattered more than, and I think the madman theory, that's the Nixon coined. Yeah, it works. I'm not sure if it's working with Iran, but in general, it works. And probably after Iran, it'll probably even work even better.
Well, and this is dealing with madman strategy compounded with madman mullah strategy, where it's, I see your rhetoric and I raise you. and I raise you, and I raise you. I mean, it's insane. Could you imagine being a graduate student and playing a tabletop exercise, and you get to be who? You get to be Trump. You get to be the Iranian spokesman. You can say whatever you want, and it's. But the hard work is going to be in the negotiations and wrapping this thing up. But I do think, I mean, this is a big legacy issue for him. Not that it matters. I told you this the first time I was on. This guy, he wants to solve intractable problems. He believes he's been put on this earth and stays on this earth, no matter how many times people try to take him off of it, including the Iranians, by the way, including the Iranians supporting people that, you know, to take shots at the president and his key cabinet staff from the first administration. Let's not forget that for a second. You know, but he's put on this earth to solve intractable problems, and that's what he's trying to do. And it's not easy. If it was easy, it'd be done. And so here we are, man. We'll see 60 days from now. Let's jump back on, man. Maybe we'll be saying, what about Cuba? What do you think about Cuba? I don't know.
What does the CIA do in Cuba? Tell me more about what the CIA did there.
All right,
brother. Well, I appreciate coming on. Coming on. I enjoyed the conversation.
I appreciate the opportunity, and always great to talk to someone who's passionate and informed and educated. Man, it's what a breath of fresh air to have a conversation with someone who's tracking on the issue. So thank you.
No, not at all, man. I appreciate it, brother. Thank you, Charles.
All right.
All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that back and forth with Charles. He knew a lot about Iran. So this is someone that you could research him. He knows a lot about Iran. I'll leave it at that. So I enjoyed this conversation. I'll give you guys a quick recap. Now I'll give you my thoughts on the conversation as well. So first, as you saw in my interview with, I think it was Ari earlier today. His name was Ari. He's the, I think he was born in Israel. I could be wrong. He was on Tucker Carlson 2 weeks ago, trying to understand Israeli foreign policy and trying to understand how Israelis think. And, you know, I wanted him to challenge some of my beliefs and my concerns when it comes to Israeli policy in South Lebanon, and whether they're going to annex land, the Greater Israel Project, etc. And that discussion with Charles, I didn't expect it to go down that path. But I always enjoy having conversations with someone challenges my beliefs, because I always try to do that myself. I don't like to be set in my ways. So it was a good back and forth. You guys know my position on the war. And so I think I'm not going to repeat it here. But I enjoyed that back and forth. I'll give you guys a quick recap on the news just so you're in the loop. So while I was speaking to Charles, Israel informed the U.S. administration that the current situation is leading to the erosion of Israel's deterrence power. That's according to Channel 12. That's pretty significant. Israel's worried that their image of the ability to deter attacks has been diminished because of the current situation. I think they're talking about I think they mean Iran's the ceasefire in Lebanon, number one, which they are forced not to attack Lebanon and Hezbollah. They're still attacking, but a lot less, because Iran requested it. And also the fact that Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, that's putting them in a very difficult position. And we have a senior Iranian official. He said, "We will not tolerate a naval blockade. And if the blockade continues, Iran will respond." So this, in my view, this shows that the strategy of having a blockade is working. Otherwise, Iran would not be lashing out as they are. We do know about the phone call between Trump and Putin earlier, 90 minutes ago. What's said publicly, I'm not going to read out what's said publicly because it's nothing interesting. But what matters more is the, hold on, I've got the general sent me something. Let me see what he sent me. All right, the general, Randy Manor, who's a regular on the show, just sent me a tweet right now. He never sends me anything. "I need to be perfectly clear with everyone. The Secretary of Defense is a clear and present danger to the U.S. Oh, wow. Okay. That's Randy himself saying that on TV, criticizing Hegseth. That's a pretty big statement from Randy. I'll get him back on the show. I think you guys enjoy him a lot whenever he's on. He's very analytical. I'm going to have him on. I'll tell the team now to bring him on. He's a great guest. I'll read out some of the other news that happened today, just so you guys are informed of the latest developments. So we know that Trump, he had a 90-minute call with Putin. What's said publicly about the call doesn't really matter. There's a ceasefire, one-day ceasefire, I think, when it comes to Ukraine. Putin says, you know, don't attack Iran. Trump says Putin wants to end the war in Ukraine. And I think Trump said a similar statement when he did a press conference earlier today. But what really matters is the fact that Putin met Arachi, and now Putin is speaking directly to Trump. So Putin may be acting more like a mediator, or it's a 90-minute call. So there's a lot of substance to it. I would assume Putin's acting like a mediator. And if I had to guess, I'd say that there is some sort of negotiations where it comes to concessions on Ukraine, on the American side, trying to force Zelensky to concede to some things in return for Putin convincing Iran to concede on some things on that front, because Russia plays a key role in allowing Iran to sustain the war effort, Russia and China. So Russia has a say in all this. And they've been supplying a lot of military equipment. Now, previous guests said they were supplying significant military equipment. A guest earlier today, former military official. Sorry, my memory is horrible. You guys might remember. I think it's a former colonel that was on the show. He's talking about the amount of military equipment that. Oh wow! It was the former chief of staff of Colin Powell that was on, General Larry Wilkinson, who said there's significant amount of military equipment that was that's being sent from Russia to Iran. So Russia has a say in what happens in Iran. So I think that call is very significant, but obviously we'd never know the exact details of that call. What else happened today? There's the crazy post by Trump. Again, not really crazy. It's a Trump post. Iran can't get their act together. They don't know how to sign a non-nuclear deal. They better get smart soon. And then he puts a photo of himself with a rifle with the words "No more Mr. Nice Guy," and bombing behind him, bombs falling on houses behind him on a mountainous region. So in other words, Iran, we're going to bomb you unless you accept a deal. Trump's already rejected Iran's deal, which I think is a silly deal, saying accept. We're going to delay the ceasefire and we're going to open the Strait of Hormuz and you remove your blockade. Trump refused. And as we've seen with the reports in the last few days, Trump believes that the blockade is working. It's strangling Iran's economy. Iran cannot store much more oil. We don't know exactly how many more days of storage facilities they have, of storage capacity they have. And as soon as that capacity is depleted, Iran will have to shut off their wells. And if they shut off their wells, that's going to cause significant damage, long-term damage. And that's why Iran is so vocal about making all these threats about Trump opening the Strait of Hormuz. Will that strategy work? I think it could. I really think it could. Oil prices are going up. Oil prices are not optimistic. But I really think, as I said, Iran does not want the war. And I think Trump's strategy of blockading them, which is economic warfare, may actually pressure them. And hopefully it's enough, because I want the war to end and just move on. Now, there's a possibility that if it doesn't work, what will Trump do next? And that's where a continuation, some sort of kinetic strike. There's another report that came out today that Trump is considering some sort of attack, a limited attack on Iran, to then have them concede like a final attack, final blow to Iran. I think that would be a terrible mistake, because I think Iran this time around will respond significantly more disproportionately. They'll destroy a lot more energy infrastructure in the Gulf. They would potentially close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. I think the impact that will have on the global economy would be terrible. There is another piece of information as well today. Oil inventories in Asia. That kind of addresses the point of whether the US could sustain the blockade for much longer. Oil inventories in parts of Asia are days or weeks away from hitting operational minimums. And the summer driving season hasn't even started. Citigroup forecasts oil at $110 in Q2. Asian storages already seeing steep declines. Global refineries are already cutting runs. So Asia's not able to sustain this for much longer. I think they'd be pressuring Trump to end this. Will Trump listen to them? We'll see. Yeah, I think that's it. I'm just looking at the other pieces of information. I've shared all the updates yesterday. It's all on my Twitter. I'll go through the updates. Obviously, the UAE left OPEC and OPEC Plus, and they've threatened to leave more of these alliances or various groups they have in the region. And this is the beginning of the massive shift that I've been talking about for a while. And I think the UAE is taking two stances. One is getting closer to the US and Israel, seeing them as deterrence and defense against potential Iranian aggression. And number two, we're seeing them diversify as well. We've had the former advisor of the president yesterday talk about how the UAE is diversifying by, they had two deals with big European defense companies, and the crown prince was in China just a few days ago during the war. So that's the UAE strategy. And one thing I think we'll see from the UAE is they will get closer to Iran. Not closer. They will improve relations with Iran despite the attacks. They understand that this is a neighbor that's going to be there to stay, and will always have significant military capabilities. Now, that depends what happens between Iran and the US. But assuming the status quo remains or there's a deal, the UAE will need to accept coexistence with Iran the same way they coexist with Saudi. That means maintaining a good relationship with the US and Israel as a deterrence, just in case. But at the same time, doing business with Iran as they have been, by the way. That's not something new for the UAE. The UAE's always been in the middle. And I think they'll do that. And I recommend they do that, while also diversifying more by expanding to China. All right, guys, I think that's it for today. That's it for the interviews. And if you guys want a full news recap, a more detailed news recap, let me know in the comments. But I think that will be it. I think we've done more than enough for today. We've done 6 interviews. Malcolm Nas couldn't do it again today. He had internet issues. He's traveling. But I think we'll do an interview with him on the weekend. I'll check with my team. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed today's interviews. I'll see you again soon. Thanks, everyone.